Great venue. Thank you all for coming. It's really not worth doing these things if there isn't an audience, so thank you. And I'll explain a little bit about how we got here. But first of all, sometimes an unconventional approach is required. Sometimes somebody has to say, you know, the way we've been doing things, in our case for 100 years, how we've been managing change, or in this guy's case, for almost 3,000 years. Everyone recognize the gentleman in this photograph? No? Yes? This is Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee, perhaps one of the 20th century's greatest philosophers. Yes, a philosopher with a degree in philosophy from the University of Washington in Seattle, where I live in the United States. And Bruce Lee came along with his philosophy and he said, you know, maybe the way that we've been learning martial arts for the last 3,000 years is wrong. Now, you have to be pretty damn good at something to be able to say that, right? To be able to reject the existing way of doing it. So if you're like me, then what you learned about Kung Fu, you learned it from watching Kung Fu Panda with your kids. And you'll know from that movie that there are 4 styles of Kung Fu: the snake, the monkey, the mantis, and the tiger. But actually, here's a list from Wikipedia. This is just what are called traditional styles. There are 64 on this list. So how do you end up with 64 different styles of Kung Fu? And the favorite ones are all there, if you look carefully on the list. Well, the thing is that when somebody changes an existing style, maybe adds some new moves to it or deletes other moves from a previous one, they give it a new brand name. And it becomes a new pattern style of martial arts. And so this goes on. If you scroll down this Wikipedia page, you'll discover there are another 40 or more what are called modern or hybrid styles. So there are actually well over 100 different pattern styles of Chinese martial arts. So if your small child says, "Daddy, I think I'd like to learn Kung Fu," you've only over 100 of them to choose from. Which one would be the best? And Bruce Lee came along and he said, you know what, this is wrong, we're learning this the wrong way. In fact, he went as far as to suggest that the way these pattern styles were learned by learning each move individually using a kata, a way of practicing the move over and over again on your own, he compared that with dry land swimming, like learning to swim without actually going into the water. And that's obviously quite a derogatory term, right? He's trying to shame or humble the teachers after perhaps thousands of years of really not much evolution in their method. Now, Lee's own method is called Jeet Kune Do. The term Jeet Kune Do means the way of the exploding fist. Do means way. So Jeet Kune is the intercepting fist. And the intercepting fist is a move in his style. He had to pick a name for it, but he emphasized that the name really wasn't important. It was a way of communicating his method. And the saying on this logo here translates as using no way as way and having no limitation as limitation. Because Bruce Lee didn't want anyone to copy an existing pattern style. He wanted them to evolve their own style of hand-to-hand combat of martial arts that worked for them and was entirely unique to them. And in order to do that, they shouldn't be limited by history. They shouldn't be limited by old ways of doing things or the existing pattern catalogue of pattern styles of martial arts, those with the brand names. His suggestion was that he used the metaphor of filling a glass of water and emptying it and saying you absorb that which is useful and you discard the rest. and then you try again, and you just keep repeating. And in order to know whether something that you're learning is useful, you need to practice on a live opponent. That if you're going to learn to swim, you need to get in the water. If you're going to learn to fight, you need to fight people. It seems like a pretty obvious idea, but apparently it was revolutionary and groundbreaking for the 1950s. So his observation was that learning martial arts by practicing kata wasn't adaptive, that a pattern style was a set of kata and it didn't evolve, and in many cases had not evolved for a very long time. So practicing kata was dry land swimming. And if you really wanted to learn to fight, you had to practice with live opponents. Actually, what was required to do that in the 1960s was innovation in protective clothing. Can you imagine being Bruce Lee's sparring partner while he's practicing on you? Perhaps now the right technology for the protective clothing would be easy. In the 1960s, they had to invent it. So pattern styles are perfectly good for controlled circumstances such as a competition. If you know that you're fighting a guy and the rules of the competition say he has to play by the same rules you're playing by, then you can anticipate how he's going to behave. But Lee concerned himself with people who thought they were champions at martial arts, and therefore they might be overly confident if they got caught in a street fight in a dark alley in Hong Kong. And in those circumstances, it's not an ordered problem. The other guy you're fighting can't be relied on to play by your rules. There are no rules in a street fight. So in order to do that, you need to be able to adapt to the circumstances. And if you haven't learned an adaptive way of fighting, you won't be able to react and adapt in a situation that's different. Hence, Jeet Kune Do was the first adaptive approach to learning Chinese martial arts. And that was a revolution after almost 3,000 years of history. So what was the motivation for what is now known as the Kanban Method? Zvonimir has failed to mention that I've been in this Agile movement several years before we called it Agile. Back in the days when we called them lightweight methods. And I was on the team that developed something called feature-driven development. Actually, what we thought we were doing was developing a retail banking system for a bank in Southeast Asia. We just accidentally invented a method in order to get that done. Well, by about 5 years later, 2002, 2003, I found that trying to get people to adopt that method in large companies, large telephone companies in the United States, and mobile phone manufacturers, that people resisted. It was okay at one department level, but if you tried to do it at a business unit level, people resisted. And any amount of logical arguing with them didn't seem to make it better. So I came to the conclusion that maybe it wasn't the method that was the problem. It was the people who were somehow resisting adoption, and that resistance was probably natural to human beings. And I started to think that what we actually needed was an evolutionary approach rather than the approach of just telling people what to do. So it turns out this approach to change dates back to the McKinsey consulting company from the 1920s. And McKinsey would come along, they would take a look at your factory or your business, and they would tell you, this is what you do now, here's a description of your current process, and that's obviously not good enough. What you need to be doing is something completely different. And this future process will deliver you much better business results. So all you need to do is change from what you do now to the future process, and we, McKinsey, will help you get that done. And this change management model has essentially become ubiquitous. and the Agile movement has been using it for the last decade. So the new process can either be defined, it comes out of a textbook because someone wrote it down, or it can be designed by the consultants using some method like value stream mapping or theory of constraints thinking processes or Six Sigma, and there's a whole range of these methods for analysing how bad is your current process and let us design out the waste and tell you how it should be in the future. And once we've designed that future process, then we help you transition. And we'll collect lots of money from you while we do it. And how will you know that we're done? Well, we have a long list of practices, and we have a clipboard, and we can walk around and say, are you performing this practice? Tick, 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 tick. And once we've checked them all off, we can announce you are now Agile. You're doing all 12 practices. Let's declare victory. We're now Agile. The question is, did that make any difference to the performance of your business or not? And even if it did, were you measuring it and able to communicate it? So it's this move to that future process, the transition, the installation of the future process that people resist. This is Daniel Kahneman. He's actually an economist. It's interesting how economists often get bored of economics. They do call it the dismal science. And they go off and they do something else. So Kahneman decided to study how people work because he figured out that most economic models were wrong, and if he understood how people work, maybe he'd be a better economist. Well, he boiled how people think down into this very simple model, and he breaks the way the brain works up into two things. He calls one part system one. This is primarily the amygdala in the back of our brain. It's very old in evolutionary terms, and it processes sensory perception, sight, hearing, smell, touch, anything we can sense, emotional feelings. And the thing about this is it's fast, but it's very slow to learn. For this part of your brain to learn something, it's actually a chemical process. It's a rewiring of the brain, a rewiring of the neural pathways. And the only way to do that is by experience. The only way for system one to learn is the experience of doing something. Hence, experience does actually matter. For all the young geeks in the audience who might think they're smarter than everyone else in the room, experience still matters for something, and sometimes getting older is a good thing. Then there's System 2. System 2 is our logical inference engine. We're quite lucky to have one of these. Not every animal on the planet has one. Now, this is the frontal cortex in the brain. And the thing about System 2 is it's slow. It's also incredibly error-prone. We're actually not nearly as good at logical inference as a pocket calculator. Not even remotely close. Right. Silicon-based equipment outperforms System 2 on speed and quality every single time. The good news about System 2 is it's fast to learn because it's learning from theory. If you can show System 2 that its understanding of a theory is incorrect, it will quickly adapt and start behaving correctly. The thing is that System 1 gets all the information first, and it processes it in a millisecond. So in order for information to get to System 2, it has to go in somehow, and once it's inside, it has to pass through System 1 in order to get to System 2. If System 1 decides, I don't like what I heard, or I don't like what I see or what I feel, then what it does is it switches off the return signal from System 2. System 2 is not capable of doing anything. It's capable of thinking about stuff and making a recommendation. So if System 2 wants me to move my arm, it has to send a signal to System 1 saying, I think David should move his arm. That would be an intelligent thing to do right now. And that will happen. If, on the other hand, System 1 has decided, I didn't like what I heard, imagine you've just presented your project plan at the program management office, a review meeting, and people start reading your plan and they think, wow, $10 million to do this, you've got to be kidding. That probably wasn't a System 2 evaluation. System 1's already decided it doesn't like your plan, and what it does is it switches off the return signal from System 2. So the person might sit and read the plan in detail, and the System 2's figuring it out and saying, this seems like a logically correct plan, and this project really is going to cost $10 million. And System 1's like, I'm not listening, I don't like your plan. This is where the resistance comes from, how we process change. So here we have a worker from our IT team. He's one of the old guys on the team, and he's a carbon-based life form. But recently, we've struggled to recruit some of the best JavaScript developers because there's a bit of a shortage of them. So we've started hiring these new guys, silicon-based life form. Well, when our Agile consultant comes along with his Agile method to explain how that's a much better way of building software, silicon-based life form says, that's absolutely logically correct, I'm totally on board, let's start tomorrow. On the other hand, there's a strong chance that our carbon-based life form is like, you know, it just doesn't feel right to me and I don't like it that much. And maybe I'm not coming along for this ride, not in a hurry. And if you have a workforce full of thousands of carbon-based life forms, the likelihood is 70 or 80% of them will respond in this fashion. The reason for that is that defined target processes contain definitions of roles and responsibilities. Software development methodologies contain definitions of roles and responsibilities, and System 1 processes that as an attack on your identity. It's like, so you want us to change to a new method? Oh, you want me to change my identity. I get a new job title, perhaps. I get new roles and responsibilities. Maybe I won't be as good at those, and people will not respect me so much. There is a method that we all have for establishing our own self-image and our own self-esteem. And when someone attacks something that we use to decide, am I happy with myself? Am I a good project manager? Well, yes, I think I am. I think I'm pretty good at planning and attention to detail and making Gantt charts. And then someone comes along and says, we don't value your Gantt charts anymore, we're not going to use them. That's like ripping out something from inside your body and throwing it away, asking you to reinvent yourself. Also, if you're one of many project managers in your company, then you're like a little pack of project managers, a little herd. And inside that social group, there is a way of establishing the ranking in the herd, a way of establishing the social status. You may not even understand it, but you feel it. And if I ask you, are you quite a good project manager, are you a good project manager? You'll say, well, I might not be the best, but I'm quite good. And in the back of your head, you've got some understanding of who's the best in the pack and sort of where do I rank. And you probably think that's above average at least. All car insurance companies will tell you that the average person believes they're an above average driver. That's a normal human behavior, right? We would actually be depressed if we didn't think that to be true. So it turns out that software development methodologies and these defined processes are designed to be resisted by human beings because System 1 does not like what it hears for about 70 to 80% of a large population being told you all have to switch to some new way of doing things. So the Kanban method, as it's now become known, rejects this old-fashioned McKinsey-style change management model and suggests that what we actually need instead is an evolutionary approach that allows you to design the process that's the best fit for you. And that your process will be different from the one that the guys down the corridor are using because they evolved their own unique style. And if we do that, then hopefully most of the people will come along for the ride. So this method, maybe it should have been called the Anderson method. Just like a long time after his death, Bruce Lee's family now refer to his method by his Chinese name. But what was unique and different about it was the use of virtual Kanban systems, and perhaps less unique, the use of visual boards, which in Chinese are also known as Kanban. So the combination of these things became the name for the method, just like the use of the intercepting fist move became the name for Bruce Lee's style of martial arts. This is a piece of Lee's philosophy. It's derived mostly from, you can buy the book of Bruce Lee's philosophy. And most of it's a combination of Buddhism, some particularly Zen Buddhism, Taoism. And there's a whole section on flow. And in the section on flow, he talks about you should be like water. And he's teaching martial artists to think about what's the opponent doing. The idea is that water flows around the rock. The rock in this picture is a metaphor for resistance. And in martial arts, the resistance is coming from the opponent. So to be good and to avoid using too much energy, if you can avoid the opponent's attacks, then that's a smarter way to fight than to fight head-on with a lot of energy. So for us, the resistance is this emotional resistance coming from System 1 inside the heads of our carbon-based life forms that we need to transition. So if Kanban should be like water, that means that our primary approach to improvement should be to avoid the resistance. In other words, don't give anyone a new job title. Don't give them a new identity. Don't change their roles and responsibilities, at least not initially. Let them evolve over time. Let them grow into a new identity. So the principles behind the Kanban method are: one, you start with what you do now. Whatever your current process is, it is what it is. And it doesn't matter how ugly it is, that's what we're going to start with. We're going to agree to pursue an evolutionary approach to change because we believe that that's more compatible with the human beings that we have to work with. And we'll initially respect our roles, responsibilities, and job titles because if we try to change those, that will provoke resistance from System 1 and they will switch off listening to any logical argument. And then to catalyze this to work, we need to encourage acts of leadership at all levels in the organization. The first three of these principles are specifically chosen because human beings resist the installation of new ways of working. They resist that McKinsey-style approach. And unless you force it on them through positional power, then generally they will not adopt. And if you do force it on them, particularly in knowledge work, they will passively, aggressively resist you. And what happens when developers passively, aggressively resist? Well, you find that your code base gets to be of poor quality. Things don't happen quickly. Your product becomes unmaintainable. People don't cooperate and collaborate together. And they don't respect the management of the organization. And as a result, the performance of the business declines, despite the fact that you installed a method that's supposed to make you perform better. So the secret to doing this is imagine that you've got some special pair of glasses that you can put on. And these glasses have Kanban lenses on them. And what they enable you to do is look around your organization and without changing it at all, view it in a service-oriented fashion. Look around and see where are the knowledge workers and what services are they performing. If you have an enterprise architect, that person performs a service. If you have user interface designers, they perform a service. If you have database administrators, they perform a service. If you have an executive who comes along and signs off an approval, that person is performing a service. You look for the services in your organization, and where there's more than one person involved, there's some form of workflow. Where there's more than one activity involved, there's some form of workflow. So we look at the activities and we map that workflow, and we pay attention to the how and the why the work arrives. What are the risks involved? Where does it come from? What do we do to it? Where does it go? And we track all that and we visualize it. And in doing so, we actually create an environment where our process starts to feed system one in our brain, and we start to experience process and learn from that experience. It enables us to motivate change because we've engaged system one, not just system two. We have this method we teach in our foundation level classes. And the acronym for this is STATIK, the system thinking approach to introducing Kanban. And on the second day of the foundation class, the groups in the class perform exercises to do the first 5 of the 6 things on this list. That first of all, we want to understand what is it we're trying to improve, why are people unhappy, what would we like to fix. Secondly, we analyze the demand for different types of work with different risks. How much of that work and when does it arrive? And we look at our capability. What is our capability to process the work? How long does it take? How much can we get done in a period of time? With what quality and with what predictability? Then we model that workflow. We discover classes of service. That's a replacement for how you do prioritization. And then we design the Kanban system and the visualization for it. And once we've done all that, we make a rollout plan. The final one on this list is not included in the foundation class. So that's great. We have some background on the Kanban method. What the heck is a Kanban system? So here's a picture of a fairly typical looking software development workflow. And every picture I show is just an example. Your picture will look different because your process will be unique to you. And on this picture, imagine it's a magnetic whiteboard. The magnets are the Kanban. Each one of these magnets represents a signal card that said we have capacity to do some work. And the tickets on this board might represent something like user stories, change requests, bugs that need to be fixed, whatever the process is you're looking at. The colors will denote some state. White might mean that something is available, where green means it's completed and can be pulled to the next stage in the system. We might move the items below the line here in order to signal that they can be moved to the next stage. So now we've got an overloading of both color and the position. We might use a magnet to say, a red magnet to say this one is blocked, and the people who are working on this one are actually now working on this one. And we've made a choice to introduce an extra magnet to break our Kanban limit for some short period of time. Kanban systems are pull systems. Right? So first of all, these are virtual Kanban. So this time we're not using physical Kanban. We're just making a number at the top of the column and imagining that those magnets are there. This is by far the most common way of doing this. And the board is the visualization of the service workflow, the work in progress, and the Kanban system. Right? This is the Kanban system here, in this case a virtual one. Kanban systems are pull systems. So the Kanban limit limits the number of pieces of work at any given stage in the process. And if we're under the limit, that means we can pull something. And we're still under the limit here, so we can pull. And then our input buffer here, we can replenish that. And we might do that once a week, for example, and this has enough work so that the system will never starve during the week ahead. We meet with business people in order to decide how to do this replenishment. What this does and how it changes the way that you work primarily is that until something's in the Kanban system, until it hits the entry point, then the item is not committed, or it shouldn't be. Ideally, it shouldn't be committed. So the act of pulling it into the system is the act of saying, we definitely want to take delivery of it. We're now sure we want to take delivery. So commitment is deferred. Therefore, this is our commitment point. We're committing to getting started. We're sure we want to take delivery. And therefore, afterwards, we do not want to abort this item. That if we had to abort it, we obviously weren't sure we wanted to take delivery. So why did we start it in the first place? Let's use that as a learning opportunity. And therefore, things which are not on the board are optional and ideally unprioritized. Why would you prioritize something if you're not sure you want to do it yet? To get people to buy into this, sometimes it's important to show them how many things they are currently discarding or abandoning. Right? So something that never makes it downstream here, never really gets committed, how many of those get abandoned or discarded? And the typical answer is in the range of 50%. So why would you bother to commit on something if there's a 50% chance you're going to throw it away or ignore it? Engaging people on their current discard or abandonment rate is one way of getting people to buy into this deferred commitment concept. In this example, I've moved the commitment point to the middle so that we can see to the left here the upstream activity, the business development activity to come up with ideas. This is often referred to as upstream Kanban, sometimes as discovery Kanban. So here's our committed work, the stuff we definitely want to take delivery of, and everything to the left is optional. It's become common to use minimum and maximum Kanban limits on this upstream work in order to ensure that we have enough options coming downstream in order to choose. Meanwhile, perhaps as many as half of those items get rejected at each stage as we go through here. This means that we spend money acquiring these options, and now we have an understanding of we spend money to convert an option into finished work. We spend money to acquire the options. How much money do we spend on the stuff that gets thrown away? And that is insurance against having the right ideas to commit to later on. In a highly uncertain world, you want to have lots of options, and you should be prepared to spend money on work that will get thrown away before you've committed to it. The next thing to worry about in a Kanban system design is commitment frequency. How often should we meet with business stakeholders to ask them to replenish this system? Well, there are a number of factors that go into this. There's the coordination and transaction cost of holding the meeting. If this meeting is expensive to organize and expensive to hold, we wouldn't want to do it so often. So we want to try and reduce the cost so we can do it more frequently, but there is a limit to how frequently, and that limit is how often does new information arrive for the business people. If we ask them to meet with us more often than the information arrives, they'll show up and say, we don't know anything new since the last time. Why are we wasting our time at this meeting? If information arrives slowly, it would be better to have a bigger buffer here and to hold the meeting less often. So understanding the information arrival rate in your business and then the transaction and coordination cost of holding a meeting with business stakeholders, frequency here. The more frequent you are, the more agile you are as a business. An on-demand commitment, one at a time, every time there's a free Kanban signal, that would be the most agile you could be. Then we have the lead time through the system. How long does it take us from the point of commitment to getting something out the other side of our Kanban board? Well, the clock starts ticking at the commitment point, And at least for the Kanban system lead time, it ends when we hit the first infinite queue, because that's the end of the Kanban system. So how often do we commit to stuff? How long does it take once we've committed? And then, how often do we deliver? Now, delivery frequency, from a technology perspective, that's got a lot easier in the last 5 or 6 years. There's a lot of you who can probably do automated deployment. On the other hand, how many of you have customers who actually want to take delivery of new software that often? The bigger constraint on delivery frequency is the cost to the customer of taking that delivery. And a lot of businesses are not focusing on that because it's not an IT department problem. If you work in a retail bank, it's not your problem to teach the bankers how to take delivery of the software more often. But you could start to put features in your product to reduce the impact of taking delivery of software more often, to help people learn the new version. And that might be a worthwhile investment so that you can deliver more frequently without them complaining. And frequent deployment is more agile. The more frequently you do it, the more agile your business is. And on-demand deployment is the most agile. So if we want a definition for agility, in this case service delivery agility, the 3 things we need to care about are our commitment frequency, our lead time after commitment, and our delivery frequency. So we take these 3 things, and if we can do them frequently, we can have short lead times, then we're in good shape, we're very agile. If we can't do them frequently and we take a long time to finish committed work, we're not so agile. And you'll recognize that these 3 things are core Kanban system dynamics. Kanban systems enable you to separate out these 3 things and tune them individually. You're not restricted to time boxes. So, understanding the Kanban method, taking Kanban systems and putting them into this bigger context we had at the beginning. Well, the idea is that you should go around your organization in a service-oriented fashion and Kanban each one of those services using that static method approach that I mentioned earlier. And then we need to add feedback loops. In Jeet Kune Do, the feedback loop is sparring with a live opponent who's using protective clothing so you don't hurt them too much. Well, the feedback loops, somewhat ironically, have become known as the Kanban Kata. And I'm sure that Håkan Fors will be talking about these later on today. And there are 3 of these. There's a stand-up meeting that we recommend happens daily. There's the service delivery review, sometimes also called the system capability review. This typically happens weekly. And the operations review, which happens monthly. The stand-up meeting, a little different perhaps than what you're used to if you understand Scrum, but the principle's somewhat similar. A service delivery review is a weekly or less often, but weekly would be good, quantitative review of system capability. So what we have here is a lead time histogram actually for 2 different types of work, for change requests and production defect fixes. And we might have some service level agreement, and we're going to compare how are we doing with the service level agreement or service level expectation that we have, and then discuss how do we improve if we're not doing well enough. Then lastly, we have the operations review. This is a system of systems level review where people bring their quantitative data from each of these typically interdependent services, and we compare how they're all doing against their service level expectations, and where the interdependencies are causing problems, then at a larger organizational level we can make some adjustments. So when we have this system of systems and lots of interdependent demand, it's the operations review that allows us to see the overview of how they're all working and where we need to make adjustments, how we need to redesign and make changes in these different systems so that the whole business performs better. So the Kanban method has these 6 specific practices. Visualize the work, the workflow, and the business risks. Implement virtual Kanban systems. Manage the flow through those systems. Make the policies explicit for things like, what does it take to move a ticket from one column to the next? What's the definition of done? Implement the Kanban Kata. You can't have an evolutionary method without feedback loops. And in order for those feedback loops to be useful, educate your workforce to enable collaborative evolution of policies and ways of working. Educate them in ways of understanding how the work works. Things like the theory of constraints, Edwards Deming's theory of profound knowledge, lean risk management, things like real option theory, and system liquidity. All stuff that we teach in advanced classes, stuff that appears in section 4 of the book on Kanban. So how do we know an evolution is an improvement? Well, if you start with what you do now and you make a change, how do you know that change is better? Well, in evolutionary biology, if you mutate a species to a new species, that new species will thrive and survive if it's fitter for its environment. That's a bit of a simplification, but it'll do for this morning. Well, the equivalent of that in business is we need to understand what customers value as fit for purpose. If our service is fit for purpose, what is it they value? And we can measure that with fitness criteria. So here we have a pizza delivery service. What are the fitness criteria for a good pizza delivery service? Well, the delivery time, the quality, both the functional and the non-functional quality, the predictability of delivery, the predictability of quality, and probably not the safety of our guy on his delivery moped. We probably don't care if he breaks a few traffic laws. But do we care about health and safety in the restaurant that cooked the pizza? Yes, we do. These 4 metrics are very commonly occurring as the metrics for service delivery and knowledge work. All you need to do is figure out the parameters that your customers care about. What's an acceptable delivery time, an acceptable level of quality, an acceptable level of predictability, and so on. This is lead time data from the 9X exchange in New York. I got this from one of the managers there. This is for 2 different departments that are maintaining 2 different trading floor systems. And so we've got lead time on the x-axis, we've got quantity of work completed on the y-axis. And the question is, which one of these 2 is fitter for purpose? Well, from purely the lead time data, even though we can see that system B is faster, we don't know if they're fitter for purpose. But if we know their service level expectation, their customer's expectation for good enough, then we can know. And the graphs at the bottom here, the 0 represents on time against the service level expectation. Anything to the left-hand side means it was early, and to the right-hand side it was late. And from this, we can now see that System B delivers most things on time and a few things late. System A, on the other hand, a large majority here is late. The summary is that the team maintaining System B deliver 5 out of 7 things on time. The other team only deliver 3 out of 7 things on time. The conclusion, Department B is fitter for its purpose than Department A. Evolutionary change works like this. Imagine that this is our current process definition and we mutate it a little bit. We can evaluate its fitness and it's not good enough, so we make a change. Our process is evolving. We can keep evaluating the fitness. We keep using the same metrics. Maybe the latest change we made isn't an improvement. Well, we could easily roll that back. But it's also perfectly valid in an evolutionary method to simply roll forward, to keep making changes and continue to evaluate the fitness. The point here is there is no definition of done for evolutionary change. There's no concept of the guy coming around with the clipboard to audit you and say, are you doing all the practices? There is no way to declare, we're done, we're now agile. But what you do know is that your business is fitter for purpose and performing better. And that should help you thrive and survive. So, business agility, we can define as both sensing and responding. And sensing is how often are we sampling the fitness criteria from different market segments, from different customers, in order to understand what they expect of us? And what's our capability to service their demand within that expectation? And then our responding is, how good are we at actually servicing them? What's our service delivery time? And how good are we at making evolutionary changes? How quickly is our process evolving and improving? And if we can do all of this at the upper end of these arrows, then we have a truly agile business that will continue to thrive and survive regardless of whether the external environment is changing on us. If you compete in a market where things change externally very rapidly, your business needs to be agile in order to survive. If you're in a very slow-moving industry where things don't change much, you actually wouldn't care about being agile other than as something to save cost. Well, saving cost is all very well, and it's a traditional motivation, but survival is a much stronger motivation. And in the modern world, external environments are changing so rapidly, even in very traditional industries, that senior executives and owners of businesses really care about agility. They don't really care about whether you're following some agile software development practice. That only matters if it's improving the business agility. And with that, thank you very much. We have the Kanban conference coming up in Bologna in Italy at the end of May, if some of you found this interesting. And I have some classes coming up later this spring in Europe. The next one's in Berlin.